Evening. Welcome. So, as we do, I'm going to introduce our guest. Real pleasure tonight to have Dr. Srirangapriya, who is a Sri Vaishnava, and we'll get into a bit about what that means. So he has an undergraduate and postgraduate degrees from Oxford and London universities in the fields of science, theology, and education. His doctorate was on the relationship between political theory and religious influence, and he has taught at both school and university levels. We're really fortunate at Avanti, particularly at this school, because Doc, as his students call him, teaches here. So he teaches religious studies and philosophy at A-level. There's actually a group of his students up at the back there. It says something for students to turn up on a Saturday night to listen to their teacher speak. So yeah, I know firsthand how much he is appreciated here, and really excited actually for him to be able to share his insights with a broader audience. So that said, we will jump in. And essentially the reason why I asked Srirangapriya to take part in this conversation, and the reason why we tried to frame this conversation in the way that we have, you probably saw the write-up in the WhatsApp message, was that there is a lot of debate, obviously, online, and has been going on for millennia, of course, in terms of the existence of God. And generally, at least what I've seen online, most of those debates revolve around the arguments from the perspective of Abrahamic traditions, which have developed those arguments over time. And those are the ones which are kind of most popular, at least in terms of general consumption. So, but there are some really interesting and unique insights from the Vedic, Hindu, Vaishnava, whatever you want to call it, tradition. And this really is an opportunity to explore what those might be in terms of reflections on the arguments that we're familiar with. And we'll kind of try and categorize those and talk through some of those, and then talk about how the Vedas give a particular perspective on that. So that's essentially what we're going to be talking about. And as always, we'll have a conversation for about 45 minutes-ish, and then hopefully we'll have 20 minutes to half an hour for questions from yourself. So do keep those questions in mind as we're going through this evening. Okay, are we ready? Okay. Okay, so we're going to start with I'm going to ask you, if you could please, to give us a general. So we're going to go through some of the general arguments. So we've got the teleological argument, and maybe if we go teleological, cosmological, and ontological. So if we go start off with teleological, if you can give us a kind of a very high level summary of what that is. And then we'll come on to, I'll ask you maybe a couple of questions on that, and then we'll come on to the next one. Is that okay? Okay, great. So teleological.
Okay, so this is probably the most intuitive argument for the existence of God. I want you all to imagine the universe, right, as much as you can about the universe that we live in. So it's very vast, it's very intricate, it's very complex. So many things seem to hold together. And the most obvious thing about it is that it's not random, right? There seems to be order, there seems to be structure in our universe. This argument in the Western tradition is most famously said by two people, William Paley and Isaac Newton. Paley says that if you were walking along a field, and apparently he had this experience, I think it was Hampstead Heath, and you saw a watch. Well, would you assume that, like, what would you assume about that watch? Tell me some of the assumptions you'd make about that watch. Someone would have lost it. Okay. How would you think differently about that watch than a stone, if you saw a stone?
Man-made and natural.
Right. There's a certain degree of complexity, a certain degree of intricacy that leads you to believe that this hasn't come about by random chance. Yeah? Okay? There must be some mind. It's not possible through a process of random evolution to arrive at this complex thing that serves a purpose. It's intricate, it's functional. So there must be some mind that's designed it. That would seem to be intuitively a reasonable assumption to make. The same argument is more amusingly made by Isaac Newton, possibly, no, almost certainly the greatest mathematician in the Western world. And he had a friend who was an atheist. And the story goes that he tried all sorts of things to convince him. And then one day, he spent the evening, he knew his friend was coming for tea the next day. So he spent the evening designing a model of the planets as we knew them. And the model worked. So you turned the cog and all the planets stayed in their perfect orbits. The thing didn't fall apart. The next day, his friend came along, and very similar to your response, my friend, his friend said, oh, who made that? And Isaac said, oh, nobody made it. It just assembled itself. And his friend said, what sort of idiot do you think I am? And he said, the same sort of idiot who thinks that the planets stay in their perfect motions without some mind behind them. So that's the essence of the teleological argument, also known as the design argument. Okay. Then there's another argument called the cosmological argument.
Okay, so wait, before we go into the cosmological.
Right.
So there are potential objections, of course, to the teleological, apart from kind of the foundational kind of objections, which we'll come on to later. But just in terms of the particular ones, such as the ones about you can't compare a man-made object to a natural phenomena, etc. Is there anything you want to say about that, or is that not consequential for now?
No, it's very important. So the idea is that you look at the universe, and from that you deduce that there is a designer, and that designer is God. Now, very interestingly, an 11th century philosopher, Ramanujacharya, from the Vaishnava tradition, he actually undermines the design argument. He says, well, okay, let's look at the universe. Isn't there so much pain and suffering in it? I think there's a saying, nature is red in tooth and claw. There's so much cruelty, pain, suffering, wound into the very fabric of creation. Doesn't that imply a cruel creator? If you're going to look honestly at the universe, and from that you're going to say, okay, I'm going to work out what the artist behind this is like, well, then he's got some answering to do. There's so much pain and suffering in this world that maybe the designer is cruel. Secondly, it's very, very quick to say that it must have a designer, to saying it has only one designer. Maybe there's a whole team of designers. Okay? So again, maybe there's not one God. Maybe there's a collection of divine beings who have created this universe. So that's another problem with it. The third one is, we all know that causes don't necessarily exist after their effects. So how do we know that the designer of this universe, if there was a designer, is still alive? That's another thing we don't know from looking at the universe. I think these are the main objections that Ramanujacharya says. So by looking at the world process, we can see that, well, the universe doesn't seem to explain itself. But to jump from that to say that there is an all-loving God. Very powerful objection, Ramanacharya says. Yeah, the universe is great. To be omnipotent, all-powerful, which is what we would expect God to be, he would have to be able to design an infinity of universes. And there's absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. So whoever designed this universe might be great, but he could just be what we would say in our Hindu culture, some sort of powerful deva. To be God, he would have to have the capacity to design an infinite number of universes. So we don't know if there are infinite universes, and certainly the universe that we have is far from perfect. So to look at the universe and then say it must have a perfect designer is too big a jump.
Okay, all right. So that's one. Yeah. That's the teleological. Hope you've all caught it. But this the design argument. So now we can move on to the cosmological, I think.
Yeah. Are we
okay with teleological?
Yeah, all good with that? Yeah? Okay.
Okay.
And remember, this is a Hari Bhakta. This is a devotee of God taking apart an argument for the existence of God. So be thinking, well, what's he up to? Well, why is he doing this? Okay. The cosmological argument. And I mean, this is just beautiful. It's just beautiful. For every effect, there is a cause. Does this seem reasonable to you? Yeah? Okay. So whether it's an object or whether it's an event, things have their causes. And we know this from looking at the nature of the cosmos. We look at the world we're in, and every effect has a cause. Okay. Then that cause now becomes the effect of some earlier cause. Agreed? Yeah? So now think about this. If this series of cause and effect went back to infinity, in other words, if there was no first uncaused cause, if there was no first uncaused cause, how have we got to where we are now? Okay, show of hands. Who kind of gets what I'm saying?
You got 50%.
Okay, look at it this way. Look at it this way. Okay. For me to give you this book, right? He had to give it to me. Yeah? Right? Or someone had to give this to me. Just assume that he gave this to me. And then somebody gave it to him. And somebody gave it to him. And so on and so on. Right? But if this chain went back in time forever, could you ever reach the first person who gave the book if there was no first uncaused cause? Okay? Look at it in terms of distance. So there's A to B. Right. Now, how far is it from A to B? Someone give me a figure. 2 feet. Okay, it's 2 feet from A to B. Right. Now imagine a situation where if this chain of cause and effect was infinite, right? Have you got that? Stay with me. If this chain of cause and effect was infinite, could you reach the end of it? Right. But if you can't reach the end of it going that way, how the heck did we reach this point here, coming this way? This chain of cause and effect cannot be infinite. There must be a starting point. There must be a first uncaused cause.
How many of you got it now?
Yeah?
Okay, that's about 75.
Okay. It might help many of the Vaishnavas. There must be a sarva karana karanam. there must be a cause of all causes, otherwise nothing would be in existence. We'd always be waiting. We'd be in a state of perpetual waiting for something to come into being. Okay. Well, that seems pretty neat. What does Ramanujacharya, the same person who's undermined the cosmological argument, he says something which one of the most famous atheists of our time uses as an objection to the cosmological argument. And he says that that first uncaused cause could be pradhana, mula prakriti. Or as Bertrand Russell says, the universe is just a brute fact. Matter has always existed. Now, if you think that's a trivial thing to say, have you never wondered, why is there anything at all? It's weird. The normal thing would be for there to be nothing, right? I mean, isn't that the easier thing, so to speak? Why is there anything? Well, Ramanujacharya says you may as well say that the first uncaused cause is matter. This lump of matter has always existed. Okay, so two of the most often used arguments by theists, a man of God has taken apart.
So just to clarify that, so Ramanuja Acharya is saying that that the first cause could have been matter, possibly. Okay, even though sometimes the theistic argument on that is that matter, in its nature, is in flux.
Right.
So is a response to that it could just perpetually be in flux, just changing state.
Yeah.
Okay, and then he's not making a point about the source of that he's saying that could be.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And we'll come on to perhaps a bit later on in terms of the kind of, you mentioned Prakriti, Pradhan, the kind of substrate, and Brahman, which underlies that, and maybe where that plays into that. But for now, I think, okay, so we talked about the point that, the objection to the idea that there could be an infinite regress, and that doesn't make logical sense. And the cosmological kind of argument that the assumption there is that the universe came into being at a certain point in time, which is supported by some scientific evidence. And if something comes into being, it has a cause, and therefore the universe had a cause. I mean, that's the general construct of that argument. So, but you're saying that
Ramanujacharya is saying that first uncaused cause could have been matter itself. So like a lump of matter always existed.
Okay.
And from that, the universe has evolved.
Yeah. Okay.
Purely materialistic theory of existence.
So basically, Stephen Hawking and company caught up 1,000 years later in terms of the okay, fine. So can we move on to then the ontological?
Okay. So to understand the ontological argument, you really have to see why Ramanujacharya is criticizing the others. It'll help to understand the nature of the ontological argument. Okay. So why would a man of God undermine some evidence for his side? To understand why Ramanujacharya is doing this, we need to think about how mesmerized we are about scientific modes of knowing. We've totally surrendered the high ground of epistemology, how we know something, to science. Science is the way we know things. Now, to show the limitations of this, I need a volunteer. And that volunteer must have at least 5 people who know them well in this audience. Okay, so if you've got 5 people who know you well, come to the front. Okay, what's your name? Vishal. Okay, so this is Vishal Bhai. Okay? Now, I want the people who know Vishal Bhai to think about all the things that Vishal Bhai is. Okay, have you got that? Yeah. Think of your knowledge of Vishalbhai. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you a comprehensive scientific description of Vishalbhai. And I'm going to begin with biology. Okay? So I'm going to write on this board here. You can see, look, can you see? Yeah, can you see? So these are all the biological facts about Vishalbhai. So there's his organs, his muscles, his whole DNA profile, his mass, okay? And I could go on in as much detail as you would like. Every biological fact about Vishalbhai is there. Okay. Now I'm going to increase the resolution, because I mean, essentially, the sciences are just increased resolution. Chemistry is just biology at higher resolution. So instead of organs and muscles, I'm now going to go to the molecular level. Okay? And so now there's the complete chemical profile of Vishalbhai. Every biochemical fact you could want to know, could possibly know about Vishalbhai is now there. Okay? Now let's go further, right? Let's get our electron microscopes out and let's go to the level of physics, particulate physics. And I'm going to give you every fact down to basic particles, every truth about Vishalbhai, and that's now here. Okay? And I could really sort of like go even further, quantum mechanics, and it's just maths. Right? Now that's a very powerful proof for the existence of God, but that's another
We'll
session.
come to that, yeah.
That's another session. So there we have all the biological facts about Vishalbhai, all the chemical facts about Vishalbhai, and all the facts about Vishalbhai from particulate physics. What do you notice? What's happened to Vishalbhai? He's evaporated. That is not Vishalbhai. You cannot know Vishalbhai through the means of empirical science. Why is that? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Because Vishalbhai is a person. The whole rules of prove God exists change once you're open to the possibility that God is a person. You can't even discover a limited, finite human person through the tools of empirical science. You can't use the same tools of discovery for the existence of objects as you can for a person. You know people in different ways. He has to reveal himself to you. You also have to be the kind of person he wants to hang out with and tell you something about him. And you can get more and more penetrating through the tools of science, and you're not going to discover Vishalbhai unless he wants you to know him. Okay?
And just before we do the follow-on to that, so you would say that that's true even in a purely deterministic sense. So if you were to look at that breakdown, going all the way down to the physics level, and we were to accept that it's all deterministic, and that personality kind of personhood of the individual doesn't kind of spring up or arise from the combination of a deterministic view of
Right. Yeah. Even then, the person has to reveal himself to you.
Yeah. And I guess there's a point there. Part of the reason why that's also true, I guess, from the other perspective, is that it's also the interplay between others in which that becomes revealed. I.e., a person isn't a person in their own kind of just stand alone. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Are we good so far? Okay. So the only or the main proof in the Western tradition that really gets this fact that God is a person, and knowing God is a question of knowing a person. The way we know God exists is the way we know a person exists. Okay? So Anselm.
Okay, so let's just backtrack. So Anselm,
Yeah.
Christian saint,
yeah.
same time as Ramanujacharya, approximately.
Almost exactly, yeah.
Almost exactly. Okay, so about 1100 years ago.
Yeah.
And he's writing what became. Well, I want to just frame this because so Anselm's ontological argument, which is quite famous in terms of being I suppose it was the first ontological argument, or at least it's the most well-known ontological argument in terms of his. So I'm going to let you explain that in terms of what it is known as today. As in the common kind of understanding of the ontological argument. How would you explain that before we go on to anything more deeper than that?
Okay, so Anselm's ontological argument is presented by most, even Western academics. It's presented as a propositional proof. So through the use of logic, I'm going to prove to you that God exists. Okay? Now, whereas the other proofs, the teleological argument and the cosmological argument, they try to prove God by looking at the nature of the universe. Anselm says, no, forget that. I'm going to prove to you that God exists. So it goes, that by the use of pure reason alone, God must exist. Now that's exciting, isn't it? Yeah? So Anselm is said to be saying, I'm going to prove to you through the use of reason alone that there must be a God. Right. So this is essentially what he says. Let's start with the definition of God. And this is very different from what the teleological argument and the cosmological argument are up to. And I want you to notice what's very different about this. Anselm says that God is the greatest conceivable being. God is that being than which one can conceive of no greater. Okay? Show of hands, who's got that? God is that being than whom no greater being can be conceived.
I think they've got it.
Yeah? Okay.
Those who haven't got it are not going to get it.
So, let's start putting together this greatest conceivable being, us, all of us together. We're going to come up with this greatest conceivable being. What would be some of his greatness-making properties? And I made a slip of the tongue there. I used a personal pronoun. What would be greatness-making qualities?
His, hers, its. Okay, so just shout them out. Purity.
Purity.
Thank you. Purity.
Okay.
What else you got?
So I could have a beaker of sodium hydroxide, pure sodium hydroxide. By purity, you mean
100%.
perfection, right? Okay. What else?
Just shout them out.
Selflessness.
Strength. Powerful.
Power. Empathy. Who said that?
At the back.
Nice. Empathy. What else? Wealth. Love. Intuition.
Love came a bit late. Okay.
Compassion.
Compassion.
Renunciation.
Something you've
Okay.
been reading. Happiness.
Happiness. Yes. Happiness. Vision of the future and omnipresence. Yeah. Beauty. Strength. Peace. Wisdom. Self-control.
Or control of others. I know what you're thinking.
Okay. So the difference here is that Anselm is very much concerned about proving the existence of a personal God. The cosmological argument, teleological argument, they both were, they get you to the point of Einstein's God. Some sort of impersonal cosmic mind. But they don't say anything about a person. Whereas Anselm, when he talks about God, and in saying that he is that being than which no greater being can be conceived, he's saying that all those personal qualities are part of the definition of God. And they have to be. When you think about God, you have to think of the perfect person. That's who you're trying to prove. Okay. Now the way Anselm, how Anselm proceeds, he's actually been misunderstood by most of the Western academic tradition.
So let's go through how it's understood in common terms, as in currently.
Right.
So his idea about, so the thought experiment about conceive of the greatest thing that you could conceive of.
Right.
Keep going.
Keep
higher
going.
and higher and higher and higher.
Yep.
And then
Okay,
add.
right. So, here's what Anselm says. God is that being than which no greater being can be conceived. Then he says that that being exists in my mind alone. So like here he is, right? He's there as an idea. But surely a being who exists in the mind alone and also exists in reality, also exists external to my mind, is a greater being. But you also understand the definition of God. God is the greatest conceivable being. Therefore, a God who exists only in the mind is not the greatest conceivable being. There's a greater being than that, one that exists in reality. Therefore, God exists in reality.
Okay, how many of you got that? Okay, just to clarify before you come in here. What we're saying here is that Anselm is taking us through this idea. You think of the greatest possible thing, the greatest possible being. But right now he's just in your mind still. Okay, once you add to that real existence, that's an additional quality, then he becomes even greater. So that proves that God must exist because the greatest possible being is one that exists. Okay, now there is an issue with this argument, and it was, I think, Kant who brought it up about this idea that existence is not a legitimate predicate in terms of, and it's not either something exists or it doesn't exist. You can't add to it. You can't add existence as a quality to something to then make it greater. It either exists or it doesn't. So he's refuting that argument, which is why actually when I first heard Anselm's ontological argument, I wasn't very convinced by it because of that reason. It just didn't seem quite right that you can just think of something and then imagine it into being or kind of logically force it into being, which is what it seemed to be doing from what is commonly accepted as and is taught in schools and universities as the ontological argument. But in conversation with Doc, and which is why I'd like you to explain, if you could go into this point, is that just, and correct me if I'm wrong also, is that you'd mentioned that Ramanujacharya, who was, as we said, around at the same time, alive at the same time as Anselm, was writing his commentary on the Vedanta Sutra.
Right.
And so the Vedanta Sutra, for those of you who don't know, it's essentially the kind of a synopsis, summary study of the entire Vedic canon in terms of the Upanishads and the Vedas and the essence of that philosophical content. And so Ramanujacharya is writing a commentary or an explanation of the Vedanta Sutra. So I'd like you, if you could, to talk through what you saw in Anselm and the similarity of what you found in that, because I think that for me at least was quite an interesting revelation, really, because it is so different to how Anselm is commonly understood and therefore seen as potentially flawed.
Yeah. So if you look at it as a proposition which Anselm claims to have proved, he clearly hasn't, because all he has said is that this is the definition of God. And if God exists, then he must exist necessarily. Right? But that's not a proof that God exists. But here's the interesting thing. And I kind of went along with that, reading articles on Anselm, reading textbooks on Anselm. And then I read the Proslogion, which is where Anselm gives what has been described as the ontological argument. The first thing you notice is he begins the Proslogion and he describes it as a prayer. He says, this is a prayer to my Lord, so that the fool may come to know you. So Anselm's situation is very much like most of us here, I assume, that we have an instinct that God exists. Now, how can I convey the reality of this? Either to myself or others, right? Anselm is praying, Lord, how can the fool who denies your existence come to know you? And what Anselm says is this. If you read the Proslogion, he says, think of the greatest conceivable being. And just keep doing that. Think of excellence after excellence after excellence. And as our friend here said, somebody else said, purity and infinity. So like, just keep doing it. Just keep going to the limit. Now, one of those greatness-making qualities would be necessary existence. Things that have always existed, if something always existed, well, that's in some way greater than something that was brought into existence by something else. So Anselm is saying, he's essentially saying in the Proslogion, you have to enter into a mood or a bhava of faith. Think about this supreme being, and part of that conception is his existence. He's saying, in that sense, it's impossible to think about God and think he doesn't exist. If you think you're doing that, you're not. It's a bit like people say with japa. If you think that chanting the holy name doesn't work, you're not chanting the holy name. Anselm is saying that if you enter this position of thinking about the supreme being, and part of your mental makeup is a openness to the possibility of his existence, then God will reveal himself to you. So Anselm is essentially saying that if you are not experiencing God, it's because you don't want to. If you are open to the possibility of his experience, he will reveal himself to you.
So that's a very different.
Very different.
That's a very different point
Right.
that he's making
Right.
in terms of the difference between proof.
Yes.
And I think this comes to the point about the distinction. I think a lot of the conversation that goes on about the debates about does God exist or not, when theists try and make claims about, watertight claims or proofs of God's existence, and when they inevitably fall down at some point in terms of a watertight proof,
Right.
The effect that then has about somebody's faith and where that places them,
Right.
because they're looking for something
Yes.
which,
Exactly.
yeah.
And this ties in with the earlier point
Yeah.
that they're looking for God in the same way that you look for the truth of objects.
Yeah.
Anselm said, when we said the greatness making properties, how many of them were personal properties? So in our language, as Hindus, I assume most of us here, what is Anselm saying God is? The bearer of all auspicious qualities. So what would we call that? Bhagavan. Bhaga, all excellences, all opulences, all perfections, the bearer of them. Or you may have come across Krishna, the supreme personality, personhood. This is so central to the Vaishnava proofs for the existence of God. You have to look for a person. The way you will find God is the way you come to know a person.
So some of the, I suppose with the different Vaishnava traditions, at least, when they speak about these different arguments, whether, the teleological, for example, used in a certain reference as a certain context in terms of bringing us, or at least urging us to open our eyes to the possibility of something, as opposed to trying to make them a proof of something. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, in his invocation to his Sri Bhashya, where he sets out the arguments for the existence of a personal God, he basically outlines there are 3 levels of knowing God. Akila bhumana janmastema bhangadilile. So there's God as the origin of the world process, right? And that's really the cosmological argument and the teleological argument. So through that, we can know that the universe doesn't seem to explain itself, right? That there is something outside the universe required to explain it. That seems a reasonable proposition, right? But we haven't got to God yet, yeah? And later, after saying that in the cosmological argument, the first cause could be brute matter, Ramanuja says, well, that's a good explanation. It's not really an explanation at all. So something is required beyond the universe to explain it. And that much we can know at, if you like, level 1 of knowing. Then he says the other things about God. His compassion, his beauty, his kindness. He's a savior of all beings, all these qualities. And he says you can know that from the Shastras. From the scriptures. Because what are the scriptures? The scriptures are nothing but the recordings of the experiences of enlightened beings. In our Hindu tradition, it's not as if, and I'm deliberately giving a simplified version of the Abrahamic traditions. I'm not saying they believe this, but it's not as if Moses comes down from the mountain with these tablets and says, this is God. Believe it or be damned. In our Hindu tradition, it's the mantra drishtas. They had these experiences, the rishis, the saints, The bhaktas, they had the experiences and then they recorded them. And that's what the scriptures are. The scriptures are the recording of direct experience. Okay. So level 1, it seems reasonable that there's something beyond this universe. That's the first level of knowing towards the existence of God. Then there is the nature of God as revealed in the scriptures. Okay. But how many of you are going to be convinced by that? The Bhagavatam says, or the Vishnu Purana says. Well, it could all be pie in the sky. Couldn't it? I mean, okay? So the highest level of knowing, Semushi Bhakti Rupe. Ramanujacharya says, the highest mode of knowing through which you know the Supreme Person is knowledge fused with love. Again, this same point. That's how you know people. Love as a mode of knowing. It's through love that you know persons. It's through love that persons reveal themselves to you. Yeah.
Okay, so now we've got to so the three levels that Ramanuja is saying that in terms of levels of accessing. So that takes us to the idea that Ramanuja is saying you can use these other means of argument or logic and speculation to get to a point where you think something may be reasonable to investigate further.
Right.
You can get to the point where somebody may come to the conclusion that that it's reasonable to believe that there is something beyond, and that will then take you to the point of looking at scriptural references of individual experiences. That then takes you to the point of experiencing yourself.
Right.
That's the kind of stage.
Right.
Wise.
But Ramanujacharya is saying that experiential step is
the personal spiritual. Personal, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's like a quantum leap.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to make you see the power of that, I mean, let me ask you here: Are there any confirmed atheists here? Please let there be at least one. No.
I can see one.
No? None. No atheists. Okay. Use your imagination. If you were an atheist, okay, and let's say that our beloved Mr. Patel, okay, the head of mathematics, he came up with an algebraic proof that God exists. My atheistic friend, would it change your life? Like, would you say, yeah, now I'm definitely getting up for Mangalarti every day? Would it? No. What difference? What the hell difference would it make if there was a logical proof for the existence of God? It wouldn't make any difference at all.
You don't think that a logical like that's that ability to be able to generate faith comes from logical? No.
Because atheism is a choice. Atheism is a choice. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, let me just find the verse. Let me just find the verse, because this shook me when I contemplated it.
So we're gonna.
Yeah.
No, you find a verse. I was just going to say, just to prepare the audience. So we're going to probably, because it's been close to 40 minutes, we will probably wrap up in the next 5-10 minutes-ish, maybe a bit less, and then we'll open up to questions. So please do kind of have that in mind, and then... No, 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 no.
No. Although that's relevant, but like this is right. Get this. This is something else. Okay. Sarva guhyatamam bhuyaha. So Krishna is saying, I'm going to repeat to you the greatest secret. Sarva guhyatamam bhuyaha. Okay. Shrunu me paramam vacha. Listen carefully. This is my paramam vacha. This is the ultimate purpose of all that I've been saying to you. Right? What I had to say to you was important enough to put a world war on pause. Right? Now he's going to tell you what that is. His greatest secret. And he repeats it. Shrunu me paramam vacha. Listen to my supreme message. Ishtosi me dridam iti. Ishtosi me dridam iti. Now, if you know what this ishta in Sanskrit, it's a wanton love. Like this is not prema or even bhava. This is like ishta. This is like Krishna is saying here that my love, Krishna is not liberal. He's promiscuous. He will if you will. That's the sense of ishta. He will if you will. Ishto si me bell confirmation. Satyam. Ishto si me dridam. And dridam, he's emphasizing. Okay? But tato vakshyami te hitam. And I'm going to keep on saying this. Vakshyami is like present continuous. I will keep on saying this until you get it. So now we've got a problem. If Krishna's love is so wanton, then why aren't we experiencing it? Yeah. Yes. Krishna is not going to compromise his love. Love is a love for persons in themselves. We're living in a world where persons are disappearing. We're not interested in persons as they present themselves to us. Even in a school context. Legislation is replacing virtue. Flash websites and sound bites is replacing integrity. Safeguarding is replacing love. Persons are disappearing. Even friendship, perhaps the most accessible form of love. How many of us in this room have a friend who's of absolutely no use to us whatsoever? Stop being useful.
I have quite a few, actually. I just can't get rid of them.
Well, then those friends serve the function of exhibiting your magnanimity. So that's their purpose. We're not interested in persons. We're not interested in persons, and yet we expect the Supreme Person to reveal himself to us. When Krishna says, do you want to know how to meditate on me? Bhoktaram yagna tapasam. Sarva loka maheshwaram. Krishna is saying, okay, you want to think about me? I'll tell you how to think about me. Sarva loka maheshwaram. The Lord of all beings. Now, this lordship we have to understand in its proper context. In the modern world, we think about lordship in terms of power and oppression, domination. But in the Middle Ages, not just in India, but even in medieval England, there was the idea of lordship as the Lord protector, the liege. Krishna is saying, I am the Lord protector of all beings. So he's defining himself in relation to other beings. So Krishna is the Lord protector of all beings. And then he says, Suhridam Sarabhutanam. And that's got a beautiful meaning and an even more beautiful meaning. Suhridam Sarabhutanam, the well-wisher of all beings. So you want to think about me, then you must know me as the well-wisher of all beings. Krishna loves you, but I hate your guts. That's not going to work. That doesn't work. If you meditate on Krishna, he is the well-wisher of all beings. So you too should be the well-wisher of all beings. But Suhridam, now this is where it gets really interesting. Suhridam also means the truest. He is the truest heart of all beings. That's Krishna consciousness. Seeing Krishna at the heart of all beings. And if you did that, he would be inescapable. His presence would be inescapable. The reality is, we want to know the Supreme Person, but we don't want to love persons as they present themselves to us every day, every moment, every second.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of one of the passages of the Bhagavad, which says that the supreme way of worship of the Supreme is through benefiting and serving others, and that was quite an interesting, as in seeing, as a consequence of seeing divinity in the presence of others. So just to summarize before we open up to the audience, in terms of the arguments that we've talked through, so teleological, cosmological, and ontological, hope you've all got those three. And in terms of what they offer to us in terms of tools to help in our spiritual journey, the idea being that you mentioned that Ramanuja Acharya is giving some limitations to their use, but they can be used to bring us to a certain point in our journey, but they have limitations. And I think that's the big difference in terms of how they're used now, or tried to be used in terms of, an absolute proof. And then the point around bringing us to the idea of how do we know a person in terms of, and that the concept, I mean, I think a really great follow-up would be about, I think it's true not just of Hinduism, but also of other traditions, that there has been at a certain point in time a big debate, whether it was in Hinduism, it seems to be a perpetual one, but about whether God is a person or not. And I think so we can have that conversation for part two. But your point there is around Ramanuja's position about how we can get to understand a person using the parallel to the Anselm's argument, that it implies God's personhood, and the way to know a person is through love. And the three stages of experience, ending in personal experience based on experience of others through scriptures, and then kind of the logical understanding that there must be something transcendent. So I think we've covered quite a lot there, and I'm sure that there will be questions, some clarifying, some challenging, and some maybe taking an argument further. So you can come at it from whichever perspective you want. And I think we've got about, let's say 15-20 minutes for questions. So we have a roaming mic, so if you have got a question, please put your hand up and the mic will come to you, and just wait for that. So yeah, we got one here. All right, we've got quite a few, so the mic can hang around in that area.
Hare Krishna. I think I've got more questions now before I enter the room now. But one question which always intrigues me is when I look up at the sky, do you believe in UFOs, and do you think there's life, aliens exist in the universe?
I think it was Stephen Hawkins who said that before the Hubble telescope, you'd have to be insane to have believed in aliens. And after the Hubble telescope, you'd have to be insane not to believe in them. I mean, there are an infinite number of planets, an infinite number of suns. Therefore, the probability of life being there on other life on other planets is almost one, certain. And it would be the height of arrogance to believe that amongst all those infinite possible universes, our universe has the greatest beings in it. So I think it's...
Sorry, quickly one more. When you asked about the qualities, people mentioned love, empathy, and stuff, which then you related to Bhagwan. But nobody mentioned qualities like wickedness, anger, selfishness, which also exists, whether they say or no, but it exists in each and every one of us. Then how do you connect those qualities to Bhagwan as well?
So if you're saying that doesn't Bhagwan have any oppositional tendencies? Yeah, he does. He hates certain things. He dislikes certain things. I was talking to a friend of mine earlier in the week that there's a common misconception that whatever happens is Krishna's will. No. Just because Krishna allows something to happen, that doesn't mean that's what he wants to happen. Just look behind you, Lord Rama. So God opposes certain things, and the wickedness in the world is actually a consequence of God's gentlemanly nature. This is a misconception, I think, that people look at the world now and they say that there's so much evil and suffering, but it's so easily forgotten. Yeah, but that's not the world that God gave us. Like, rewind the tape. He gave us Satya Yuga. Yeah. We've got it to this present condition. He gave us practically as far as you could have the kingdom of God, without him being in your face all the time, for you to have some independence. But all this wickedness and badness in the world, we have brought it to this present condition. Yeah?
Okay.
Hare Krishna. I wanted to ask you, Prabhuji, that you said in the beginning, when Ramanuja said the cause and effect theory, the matter was still there. But even for the matter being there has to be a reason. I mean, something will not just exist like poof.
No, but Ramanujacharya is saying that the
So in a
universe...
hypothetical
Yes.
situation, he's saying...
Yeah, he's
that
saying logically you
particles
can't dismiss that.
So it is a hypothetical situation he's propounding, that there has to be a matter in the beginningless time. That is what you're trying
No. He's saying that the reality, the presence of a personal God cannot be known just by looking at the facts of the universe. Shastrayo nitvat. You have to turn to scripture. And that scripture itself is the personal experience of those who have encountered the Brahman.
Just to clarify, he used the word has to. He's not saying it has to be there. He's saying that you can't dismiss the possibility of it being there.
Yeah.
Sorry, one more. Another thing, you said Ramanujam and Ansam existed at the timelines were similar. So Ramanuja had something to go on, like when he was writing Vedanta Sutras, he had Vedas. What did Ansam have, because I have actually not read his theory, to conceive something which is inconceivably greatest? How would you conceive someone which you cannot conceive? So what was his, if you can just throw a little bit of light on that?
I think it's interesting. I think in that sense, Ansam is a genius. I think once you understand what his argument is doing, it's something very different from what other thinkers have done in proving God's existence. I mean, he had the Psalms. You know, there's plenty in the Old Testament glimpses of the greatness of God, but not. I would humbly suggest not to the extent. No, I don't want to say that because, yeah, no, I don't want to say that. Yeah.
So there's a couple of questions there. So yeah, go.
So just with regards to the point about, so firstly, thank you so much. It was really interesting. Firstly, with regards to the point about only science sort of not being able to prove the existence of Vishal Bhai. So like, I think science can definitely prove the existence of Vishal Bhai. So, you know, you can say that biologically there's a heart beating, chemically there are chemical processes going on, and you know, so the existence can definitely be proved. So why can't that be used for God? Because firstly, I'd like to get to the stage of, you know, at least existing there's a God, you know, and then personal coming on later on.
Ramanujacharya would say that science can get you to the point of Einstein's God, but it can't get you to the point of the personal God of rasa, bhava, relationship. Yeah. I'll if you email me, I'll try and there's a passage where Einstein says the kind of God he believes in, and I think that'd be very helpful. So, yeah, where he talks about some sort of cosmic intelligence he can believe in, some sort of, you know, primordial design behind everything. He can go with that, but he can't go with the idea of a personal God who loves him and cares for him. A very interesting twist on that is a friend of mine at university, very bright girl, and we'd often have debates on the existence of God, and she'd always be one of the big players, you know, on our side, and but I would always go to evensong at chapel, and she would never go. She's like, never go. And I asked her once, you know, why do you never come to church with me? And she was a Christian, from a Christian family. And this goes back to knowing God as a proposition, as a factual, existent entity. And she said, yeah, I know there's a God, but I don't see any reason why he should be bothered about me. Ishto si me. She'd never experienced that. Yeah. So knowing God exists is relatively true. I mean, take it further. You mentioned the Bible. Who knew God exists? Who was in his eternal realms? Like, now the Christians, they get some things really right. The devil, he knew God exists. The question is not whether God exists or not. The question is, do you want to be in a relationship with him? And therefore, as we were discussing earlier, that, you know, atheism is a choice. And it's a choice which only God could facilitate. Mama maya duratyaya. You want to forget me? Really? Well, how are you going to do that unless he facilitates it? That's what a gentleman he is. Okay, you want to forget me? My Maya will do it for you. There you go. Play your little game. I don't exist. You define yourself. But that atheism can only be facilitated by his grace. Because otherwise, how else would we forget him? If we are remotely open to the fact, his presence would just be overwhelming. Yeah.
I'm going to, so just before you, because there are lots of questions, so if we can keep the responses.
Okay, sorry.
No, I think it's really helpful, but I just want to get as many individuals to get their chance. Go ahead. Whoever's got the mic.
Sorry, I don't know if my question's really that. I don't know how to ask this question actually, but it was leading on from your question about badness around the world. And so what I understood you to be saying is that a lot of it's caused by us, you know. And you're saying that the Lord does actually feel, you know, there are things that he doesn't like. But if we're going back to when we're kind of conceiving of a Lord in its greatness, like the best at everything or great at everything, we were picking up on all the good things, like, oh, powerful, he's strong, he's, you know, compassionate, but we didn't really pick up on like all the death and the tragedy and ghastliness and evil, like the greatest of all that stuff. So I would probably, if I was conceiving of the Lord, I would think of him in all the good, supposedly good things, and all the supposedly bad things as well. So all of that's him, and like, where would you go from that? Because I think maybe this is why people stop believing in the Lord, because they might have that, and then when they experience this ghastliness, then the buck stops there, and they don't move on. And why is it that we just, like, later on just focus on all the stuff that we like about God?
Okay, so that ties in with my friend's point about purity. That one of the defining qualities of God is amalatva, purity. Now, would you say that cruelty is a greatness-making property? Does a being become more great if he is cruel? So when Ramanujacharya describes God, he says that he's a possessor of all auspicious qualities and the very antithesis of all that is wicked. So that wickedness, that evil in the world, that's our creation. We are co-creators. We are co-creators of our universe. So those things, we have brought them into existence. I mean, it's like people say that, you know, like, so, I mean, I think it's a very, very, I'm going to go off the track. Yeah. Is that good?
I think just to the point you were making earlier, which I think was just a response maybe to this before we come to the next question, in terms of God being the source of everything, and those qualities which we may perceive as good or bad, all of them actually to some degree or another are some kind of perversion of that original state. Some are just more perverted than others. And you know, so in terms of the source,
right. So he's a source of all.
That source is still the same.
Yeah, he's a source of all beings, and one of those beings, that class of beings, is beings who have free will. So if he constantly interfered, then that would be a null set. There would be no free will in our world. And then when you say, yeah, but why didn't he restrict the amount of free will? Well, maybe he did. Maybe he did. I mean, Hitler died. Like, he didn't carry on doing, so like, you know, where you, so, yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Ask a question.
So I don't think you've, first of all, thank you for the wonderful talk. You were talking about loving God, but is it the nature of love always to feel good? So whether you're loving your dog, you're loving your girlfriend, your wife, or your kids, you're going to feel happy.
Yeah.
And so now you're just creating an entity, God, in your head, and you're feeling this love. So you could say God made me have it, but it could just be like a tautology that you've created, like this God, and now you just feel love, and that's your proof that he exists.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be.
How would you differentiate? Is there a way of, is there a different quality, or can it be the same thing for some people, or what's your opinion on that?
Okay, some of these guys up here will have an answer to that. So you're saying that could God just be a mental concoction? Basically. Yeah. There's a person called Descartes, and he's got a proof of the existence of God that's based on the idea that if you really understand what God is, no finite being could have come up with that. Like, you couldn't invent this shit. It's like it's like, so like if you have the idea of infinity, because he was a mathematician. Infinity, the idea of infinity is not just adding loads of finite things together. You're never going to get to infinity like that. So the idea of God, Bhagavan, the embodiment of all excellences, it's not something which a finite being could come up with. And the fact that you feel pleasure when you love God, well, that's just an inevitable side effect. It's not the reason why you love God.
If I could just take that, the point about experience. So I think the question points to, if we in Ramanuja's 3-tier levels of understanding God, and the third being personal experience, and you said that's a quantum leap from the first and second. And I think what sometimes happens is we're conflating two things. We're like the initial experience of, like, I mean, you see it in yoga and meditation, right? So people are doing yoga and meditation. So you do some yoga meditation, you do some breathing exercise, whatever, people feel better, right? So you get some stress relief or whatever, and they conceive of that as a spiritual experience. It might not have nothing to do with a spiritual experience. It might just be about calming yourself down. So in the same vein,
right,
you do something towards God, you feel some perception, but it's not the third stage of realizing Brahman, which Ramanuja is talking about. And how do you distinguish those two states?
Okay, thank you. I understand your question better now. Thank you. Thank you. We will never know God as God. We won't. We will never know God as God. Arjuna tried it. How does Krishna reveal himself to Arjuna? First of all, he's his chauffeur. Then he's his therapist. Then he's his friend. And then Arjuna wants to try his luck. Show me yourself as God. Bad move. We will never know God as God. In fact, there's a brilliant essay by one of our students. Humility and passion. To know God, you must have the humility to realize that you will never know him as God. You only know the reality of that experience. And that experience could be created by a being who's not God. You will never know. You will never know God as God.
Wait, so you can't leave it like that. So, if you will never know God as God,
Yeah.
then the question is, how do you know God, right? So so Arjuna, like to your point, Gita.
Right.
So Arjuna's asking Krishna, reveal yourself, your Virat Roop or universal form. He reveals a universal form,
Right.
thousands of heads and arms and all of space and time combined into one point, etc. Right? So he sees that and he finds it overwhelming, and then he sees another form of God. But that form of God that he does see, the 4-arm form and the 2-arm form, that form of God is God, no? Or are you
Yeah,
saying
it is
that
God, but Arjuna is not keeping in his conception
yeah, the totality.
the totality.
Okay, so
not possible.
okay, so all right, I got it. So the idea is that you're saying you can experience and have a reciprocal exchange and relationship with God, but it's in that particular dimension that you're experiencing. You're not going to experience the totality of God, right? Okay, so that's clear. But in terms of the actual experience of the distinction between that experience which one may have in their particular relationship with God, how do I distinguish that as somebody who's practicing spiritual life? How do I distinguish that aspiration that I have with the experience that I have, which may be a mental state that I'm convincing myself that this deity that I'm interacting with is producing some dopamine effect?
Yeah, no, you can't fake it till you make it. You'll know when you get there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's I guess that's the distinction between what it was a question actually. Sorry, I'm gonna because I can. I'm gonna ask a question. The question is that in terms of an experience that somebody may have that cannot be an experience of the mind. Is that where would you place yourself on that? Like, how would you respond to that? Can I experience something in my spiritual life and practice that cannot be an experience of my mind?
Yeah, so if you have experiences of all those qualities infinitely, the infinite goodness, infinite purity, infinite bliss.
Okay. So that's how you distinguish the two.
Yes.
Okay, so I think that's the response to the question, isn't it?
So like if you're having a pizza, you can conceive a better pizza, right? But when you come across God, there'll be this avalanche of that ecstasy will be greater than what you can keep up with.
Okay, that's a really, really helpful kind of way to look at it and to create the distinction, because I think that's a question that comes up for practitioners. So you've been dying to ask a question, but you don't have a mic. So wait 1 minute. Where is the mic? Okay, so look, we'll go to you and then to you.
Okay, so in terms of my question, it's more around getting to the kingdom of God and getting to Krishna. Krishna is heaven. What I don't like is, I believe Krishna is the God of Christians and Muslims as well. I don't fully know about the Islamic and Christianity religion, but their religion just seems much more simple in terms of you live one life, you try to be a good person, you pass away and you go straight to heaven. Whereas I find with if you believe in Krishna, if you're in Krishna consciousness and you believe in Krishna, you've got to keep being reincarnated. You've got to keep being pure and pure in every life to attain him. Is that true though? Is there any truth in that? Do you think Krishna? Do you think? I think if you just live one life, can you not just attain Krishna?
Forget one life. If you let down your guard for 1 second, he'd take you over.
But why does our religion or why does our culture always and why is it always stressed to us that reincarnation is stressed to us? We have to keep being pure. We've got to keep living every life. We've got to get more and more purer, and that's the only way we can attain him. Why is that? Why can we not just have the message that, you know what, because with Christianity and Islam, you live one life. As long as you're a good person, you do what you need to do, you can attain God's heaven straight away. It seems much more easier compared to our religion, where we have to go through 8 billion different. You have to keep. No, not true. But you as a person that's into God, you need to understand these things, like, because this is what a lot of atheist people would think.
Yeah, but
why
you,
would I?
You don't have to.
So
You only have to because you want to. Because
I'm not saying
you're
we
not
want to, but that's what we've
serious.
been told, or that's what's communicated down to us in our religion, that of reincarnation, of always trying to be as pure as you can. And
That's why we need more Avanti schools, because people don't know.
it's fair to assume.
Okay. So think about when you or others go to the mandir. What are they asking the Lord for? How many are asking for his eternal devotional service?
Well, when we go, a lot of people just ask for, they want this and they want
Yeah.
that.
So that's why it's going to take you 8.4 billion lifetimes, whatever it is, to get there. That's why it's like you can't say that, oh, well, I'm not serious about this, but I want it right now. I mean, he's only he's giving you chance after chance after chance. That's his infinite patience.
And that's an interesting distinction also, that it's a chance after chance as opposed to one chance, because you screw up that chance,
Yeah.
it has consequences.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the problem why, us Hindus are like just so pathetic about this. Because I'll do it next lifetime. And then the next one, and the next one. I mean, if Bhagwan came right now and said, right, who's coming with me? I know what I'd think. I think, well, let me get my daughter married first. Yeah. So...
Okay.
So for us, as long as we're good people and as long as we keep trying to get as close as we can to him in this lifetime, there's a good chance that we will now go straight into his kingdom of heaven. We don't have to keep being reincarnated or
Yeah, it's your choice.
as our culture, as our what's been
no,
handed
it's
to
not
us,
it's not necessary.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, to this lady here, please.
Some of those questions have been answered.
Okay, great.
Actually, I wanted to talk about something on the experience thing. Let's see how to put it. Basically, I think if I'm speaking French and you're speaking English, and we don't quite connect because we don't understand each other. But when we are at bliss, when we are totally pure in our soul and mind and heart in the middle of the night when all is calm, and you come from a beautiful, peaceful place, I've had 2 experiences where I have asked for almost a miracle, unbelievably, after the death of my mother, after about maybe 15 years after the death. And it is unbelievable that the next morning I received something from another country of proof of something, because what I asked for came in it's difficult to describe, but the answer came, or the ask was answered. And then it happened again. And you say that you can't ever know God. So what is this? Because it has happened twice, and it is not a little thing. It is a miraculous thing that it was just an ask from my soul, and it happened twice. I am not one of the most decent people that prays all the time, but I am totally devoted. I cry at the thought of God, and I love. And I also believe that the other thing you said about bad things is what we have become. God didn't give us, but I think good things are also what we have become, not necessarily. I would like that answer, but the most important thing is this experience twice. What is that if not a connection of some sort?
Right. So, thank you for the points you made. Allow me to clarify. I'm not saying you can't know God, but I'm saying that you can't know God in his entirety. That's what I meant, but you can't know God as God. So even when we return to the spiritual world, every single second he's going to surprise us with more beauty, more kindness, more saulabhya, more compassion. He's going to surprise us even there. So what we thought we knew, that's going to be nothing to what awaits us, and that will continue eternally.
So this experience is
It's a glimpse.
A glimpse.
Yeah, and it's authentic and it's real. Yeah. But the word Brahman comes from the root Brha. So we say like the printing press. Brihad Mridanga, the big Mridanga. Brha means that which is great and is ever increasing and is ever increasing others. So it is great and is a source of greatness in others, and it is ever increasingly making greatness.
Okay, where's the next question? Okay.
Thank you for the talk. My question was on the ontological argument as you framed it, which I guess I understood as if you believe in God and if you have faith, he will reveal himself to you, and that was the kind of proof. I wanted to touch on if you just replace God in that sentence with Santa Claus, like it doesn't work. So
No, it doesn't work.
How do you describe the ontological
It doesn't work because
argument
Santa Claus doesn't
as a proof?
exist.
But that's, well, if God exists, he exists. So how do you kind of get to that being a proof, as it were?
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that it won't work with Santa Claus. Because Santa Claus doesn't exist. God exists.
But
so if you follow this process, he will reveal himself to you.
But why won't Santa Claus?
Because he can't. He doesn't exist.
It's the same, right? It's sort of a circular argument.
No, it's not a circular argument. The argument, this is where I said for Anselm, he's in the same position as most of us. He has this intuition that God exists. Okay. And then he says that, well, I'm gonna give this a go. What do I need to prove that this is real? Okay. So now, if you were to do that with Santa Claus, if you're to follow the same process, your Santa Claus would end up looking pretty much like Krishna, the greatest conceivable being. In the logic of the argument, yeah, God is the greatest conceivable being. Santa Claus isn't. At the deepest level, Santa Claus doesn't have necessary existence. He could not exist. But if you're going to think about God, then wired into your meditation on God must be his existence. So in other words, Anselm is saying, if you read Proslogion, yeah, not if you read the AQA textbook, but if you read the Proslogion, it's about positioning yourself in an attitude of faith on the existence of the Supreme Being. And Anselm is confident because he's done it and he has experienced. From his experience, he comes to conclude that there is a God.
Can I just, I think the difference that when we were talking about the two versions of the ontological argument, the one that's commonly known and the one that is, one of them is seeking to make the proof, before you do the experiment. So it's making an ontological argument, right? That's why it's called that. But the other one is this idea of positioning oneself and the experience being revealed, i.e. it's a prayer. And that's the difference. And I think that's the point about how Santa Claus can't fulfill that prayer. But if you're looking for, and I think that's what you're talking about in terms of Santa Claus, I think that argument actually is true. I think, and that's one of the rebuttals to the common version of Anselm is that, well, I could imagine an ideal island, and then I could imagine it into existence, but that ideal island I know doesn't exist, and so that's the same thing. I could imagine Santa Claus, and I could then say, well, to make Santa Claus greater, he must exist, right? Which is what you're saying. That doesn't make sense, but that's exactly. I mean, that's the same reason why I didn't believe in the ontological argument as it's positioned commonly. But in terms of the version of its role as a form of prayer and access to reciprocation for a God, if they exist, right? So you're not even accepting a priori he exists, but if they exist, will reveal themselves. That's something that doesn't work with Santa Claus.
Yeah, it's a sadhana. It's an experiment. And therefore you can't know the conclusion of an experiment until you perform it. And Anselm is saying, do this, and you will experience.
I'm really sorry. I know we have seen more hands up, but unfortunately we are out of time. So can we start off by giving a massive round of applause to both?